Hi there, my name is John DeWitt, owner of Thunder Solutions LLC, and I want to introduce you to our accessibility library called Thunder Access. Today I'm going to teach you how to make a simple menu ADA compliant by using this tool. Before diving into the code, I want to quickly demonstrate what an accessible menu might look like without Thunder Access. Right here, I want to point out all the ARIA attributes, tab index, alt text, etc. Then notice how the attributes toggle as I'm clicking on the menu to expand and collapse it. So this is what it looks like in the browser, but let's take a look at our code editor to see how it looks in the template. Here we can see the elements as they're laid out in the template, with those ARIA attributes, tab index, etc. The navigation is just a list of anchor tags rather than being nested in an unordered list, and that's a legitimate approach. It has some pros and cons with some high-profile proponents on each, but for our purposes, it's probably okay. If you're interested in learning more about Listless navigation, I'll add a couple links in the description for some further reading. At any rate, our focus today is just on these attributes, and also on this script over here. As you can see, it's pretty basic, where we grab the button element and the navigation element and toggle these attributes when the click event is triggered. Before I go any further, I want to talk about the age-old discussion about separation of concerns. In today's world, no one argues that inline styles are a bad practice. This is because it can make your markup difficult to read and maintain, and the rules can't be consolidated and reused across multiple elements. The use of a style sheet makes your code base less repetitive and more versatile. Why would I bring that up? Well, my brother and mentor once told me that accessibility attributes are like styles for the blind. In other words, all these attributes don't really play a semantic role in the content, but rather a more presentational one. And that begs the question, if we don't inline our CSS, then why would we inline our accessibility? By the same token, if a style sheet can be used to write reusable rules, why not apply the same approach to accessibility too? That's the essence of the motive behind this library. So I'll demonstrate exactly how you can make that happen in your own codebase. Here, we've removed the attributes and scripts so we can start fresh. In this example, we'll utilize Unpkg to make the accessibility layer globally available in our code. But in most circumstances, you probably want to use npm. To install it with npm, just open a terminal and type npm I Thunder Solutions Access. And then you can just import it in your script with import add accessibility rules from Thunder Solutions /access. But in our case, we're doing it the old-fashioned way without npm, so thanks to this unpackaged script, we can destructure this function from the global accessibility layer. So const add accessibility rules accessibility layer. And that's made possible because of this unpackaged script over here, which you can use with any npm library. Now we're ready to start writing our code. To begin, we just need to call the function add accessibility rules, and that's going to take a configuration object with a few different options. But we'll start with the most straightforward one, rules. Inside this property, you can define accessibility rules which are akin to CSS style rules. So each key in this object should reflect a CSS selector, and the values will determine what we do to all those elements in the DOM that match. So let's select menu icon first. And we'll assign an object there. And the first property is just going to be ARIA. And we'll add hidden true. Instead of writing each attribute out, like ARIA expanded and ARIA owns, etc., we just write ARIA as the property and define each suffix as subproperties. Additionally, we can add other attributes related to accessibility that may not be prefixed by ARIA in the attr property, which is just an abbreviation for attribute. So we'll add tab index -1 and alt blank. That way, it can't be selected or seen by screen readers, and it's just completely ignored because it's just nothing but a visual icon. Now, tab index and alt are commonly associated with accessibility because they impact the way keyboard navigation works with screen readers. You may not use class, ID, style, or any on-event listener with this property, because those do not directly involve accessibility and may end up conflicting with other parts of your application. But besides those specific attributes, anything goes here because flexibility was an important factor for Thunder Access. In other words, don't abuse this flexibility. It's up to you to follow and enforce best practice. Okay, let's save what we have so far and take a look at the browser to see what we did. Okay, so now we can see that our icon is indeed hidden from screen readers with ARIA hidden, a negative tab index, and empty alt text. And this is all here even though we never actually wrote it directly in our template. Okay, now we want our navigation to be hidden by default so we can toggle its visibility later on. So first we're going to add another selector for navigation. And we're going to add ARIA hidden true. And with this, I want to make a note that this does not visually hide your element. It just applies the ARIA hidden attribute, which only hides it from screen readers. To visually hide it, you'll need to add some corresponding CSS, which we've already done right here. But now that it's hidden, we still need a way to toggle it back into view, so let's add a couple things to the menu button, and then I'll show you how to add some interactivity to this. So let's add another rule that's just called menu button. And then we're going to add ARIA expanded false, as well as owns. And we're going to use the ID of the navigation, which is menu. And we're ready to go. Okay, we've been working within this rules property the whole time, but to make our menu interactive, we'll need to add a methods property too. So let's go up here and add methods. And we'll add our first method called toggle menu. And so each method defined in here can be referenced from the rules, which I'll show you in a moment. The first parameter is always a set of helpful utilities concerning common accessibility needs, and the second parameter is an event, and this event can vary depending on what triggered this method. So we'll just call that utils and event. And we'll start out with something very basic, event.prevent default. And then we'll run utils.toggle expanded. Toggle expanded takes two selectors, basically parent and child. So the first selector should target the button in charge of toggling. So .menu button. And then the second selector should target the element being toggled. So that means navigation. And what this does is switch the ARIA expanded attribute on the button from false to true, and the ARIA hidden attribute on the menu from true to false simultaneously. Once again, these do not impact the actual visibility of the elements without the help of CSS, and that's by design. We don't want to take visual concerns away from CSS, we just want to do some extra things that CSS can't do. Next, we're going to write utils.toggle focus trap. Toggle focus trap just takes one selector. A focus trap is a term used to describe what happens when a user can't use the keyboard to navigate outside the scope of the provided element. This can be especially useful for modal dialogues, but in this case we're using it for an open menu. So we'll just target navigation. So now our focus is trapped inside the navigation element. That's all we should need to do for the toggle menu method, so let's hook this up to work with our rules now. The benefit of writing the methods in their own little property is that now you get to reuse the same method in multiple different cases. Next, if we go back down to our rules, down here beside the ARIA property, we can add another property called mouse, and inside of there add click, and this just takes an array of strings which correspond to the methods that you've defined above. So in this case, we'll just add toggle menu. And what it'll do is when you click on this element, it will run all of these methods in order. But for right now, we only have the one event, so we'll leave it at that. So let's just save this and see what it looks like in the browser. So now you can see the ARIA owns and ARIA expanded attributes are applied, and if we toggle this, we can see the focus trap is working because the tab index of all the focusable elements changes to -1. And the ARIA expanded is toggling to true, and ARIA hidden is toggling to false. So everything seems to be pretty much in order. And now we've pretty much caught up to where we left off in the earlier example. But this way our templates remain clean and our rules are reusable. But we can easily take this a step further and improve the keyboard navigation according to the Web Accessibility Initiative recommendations. Before we start defining keyboard events in the rules, let's begin by adding a few useful methods. Here, I've already written these ahead of time, so I'll just go ahead and paste them in here, and I'll talk a little bit about each one. So this focus function takes only one argument, and it can either be a keyword or a selector. Next is to focus on the next focusable element. Previous is to focus on the previous focusable element. Off is to completely unfocus everything, and finally a selector is used to select that specific element, which is our menu button in this case. Now we can move back down to our rules and start making use of these new methods. Down here beside the mouse property, let's add another one called keyboard, and enter. In this property, each key corresponds to the particular keyboard key being pressed. I'll add a full list of these keys from MDN documentation in the description. This is slightly different from mouse because the keys correspond with the mouse event. In the case of keyboard, everything is applied to the key down event by default. This can be configured to use key press or key up or something, but I think you'll find that key down gets the job done in just about every situation, so we won't worry about that this time. So with that said, let's just start adding some methods. So when we are focused on this element and we hit enter, we want it to toggle the menu. And we also want it to focus the first available element inside of the menu. And now we also want to add an arrow down. And this is going to let us do pretty much the same thing. So we'll just do it again. Toggle menu. Focus next. And then finally, if we have the menu button focused and we hit escape, we want it to completely just remove focus from everything. Now we are able to open the menu just by using the keyboard. If we hit tab, then enter, the menu expands. But once you're inside the menu, you can't collapse it. That's because the menu items themselves have no keyboard handlers on them yet, so let's add that now. Okay, so we know our menu items have a class of item. So let's select that with .item. And then we'll just add a keyboard property here and add a few handlers for navigation. So when we hit the arrow up key, we want it to focus the previous menu item. So focus prev to correspond with this focus previous method above. And then if we add arrow down, we want this one to focus the next item. So focus next. And finally, we also want an escape so that we can toggle the menu closed and then focus the menu button. Now, not only can we close the menu from the inside, but we can also navigate through the items with our up and down keys. But perhaps it would be useful for a blind person to be told how to navigate, because they have no idea whether the menu is vertical or horizontal. The ARIA label property can sometimes be used to announce text like that, which is irrelevant to sighted users, but support is a little shaky, and it might be a little adjacent from its intended usage anyway. A common strategy people use to address this kind of situation is a visually hidden text element. It's important to understand the accessibility semantics of CSS in this case, because a simple display none will hide the content from screen readers as well. So we have to take a slightly more complicated approach to hiding these elements. Once again, Thunder Access comes to the rescue by making all of this happen automatically without all that complexity. If we simply add another property alongside ARIA, we call it screen reader text, Then we can just add a message in here, which I've copied already, and this just lets our blind users understand better how to navigate this menu. Okay, one more thing, and then we'll take a look at the browser to see what we've got. Let's take another look at the rules for each item. It may be expected that when a user arrives at the first element, it should collapse the menu and focus the parent button. So to do that, we'll need to apply some slightly different rules to just the first item. In order to do that, let's first change the current selector so it only selects everything that is not the first item. So we'll come here and we'll add not first child. And if you're experienced with CSS, this should look pretty familiar to you. But the part I want to call out is that this won't work as expected, because the first child is no longer the first navigation item, thanks to our use of screen reader text from the previous step. That text generates a span element and prepends it directly inside the selected element, so that means our span is now the first child, and this selector will never match anything. That's just a little caveat I wanted to point out. It's not a problem with Thunder Access, it's just a quirk of the overall approach to screen reader text. To get around this issue, we can slightly change our selector to first of type instead. And that will not count the span because it doesn't match the item part of this selector. And now with that being done, we can add the handlers for the first item. So let's just copy paste this whole thing, and then we'll make some adjustments. So first, we just want to get rid of this not. Then we can change our arrow up handlers so they do the same thing as escape. Just like that. And now we're finally ready to take one last look at the browser. So now we can see that our keyboard navigation is working. If I hit Tab, the menu button focuses, and then if I hit the down arrow or Enter, the menu expands. And then I can use either Tab or the down arrow to cycle down through each item infinitely. Or if I hit the up arrow, I can navigate backwards up to the first item, at which point continuing to hit the up arrow collapses the menu. Alternatively, I can select some random item in the middle and then hit Escape, and the menu collapses with the menu button focused once again. And if we take a look at the elements, we can see our screen reader text right here. So if we were using a screen reader, that's the text a blind person would hear out loud. But you can see the style applied to each tag, which visually hides it so we can't see it just by looking at the menu. Alright, that concludes this Thunder Access tutorial. I hope you find our tool as helpful as we do, and if you like it, please share it with your friends and coworkers. We also welcome you to create issues on our GitHub page if you encounter any. And remember, this library is framework agnostic, so it can be used alongside React, Vue, Svelte, or whatever you prefer. If you use CSS modules, you can utilize dynamic properties and import the CSS in the same way you would in your components. Perhaps in a later tutorial, I'll show you exactly how to do that. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this introduction, and if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. See you around.